Ah, my dearest listeners, Lady Whistledown returns, quill sharpened and scandal in hand. This morning at the St. George's Church, the hour of vows, the tun gasped as a duke's knees faltered at the altar. Yes, faltered. One moment he stood ready to claim an ugly heiress for an agreed reason. The next, the veil was lifted, and he found himself staring into the eyes of the most breathtaking woman in England, a woman who dared to look at him as if she'd planned his undoing. They say he froze before the altar, undone by the very woman he meant to pity. They say he married her for duty and lost his heart before the priest could say amen. But tell me what truly dropped the mighty Duke of Ashford to his knees, her beauty, or the secret she hid behind that carefully crafted lie of ugliness? Ah, my dearest listeners, before I unveil tonight's delicious scandal, might I make one small request? If you find yourself as hopelessly devoted to London's whispers as I am, do subscribe to our little circle of intrigue. And do tell me, from where in this grand world are you listening? Your secrets are safe with me, but your presence delights me all the same. Dearest gentle listener, I confess a particular weakness for weddings. There is something deliciously revealing about watching two souls bind themselves before God and society. The trembling hands, the forced smiles, the whispered vows that may or may not be lies. But never in all my years of chronicling London's most intimate moments have I witnessed a ceremony quite so unexpected as the one that unfolded this morning at St. George's Church. The groom, you ask? None other than Duke Alexander Ashford, that imposing specimen of masculine pride who has graced our ballrooms with his cold indifference for nearly a decade. Tall, devastatingly handsome, with eyes the colour of winter storms and a jaw that might have been carved from marble by an artist who understood cruelty. The kind of man who makes debutantes swoon and their mothers calculate dowries with trembling fingers. Yet there he stood at the altar, his aristocratic features arranged in an expression of such magnificent resignation that one might have thought he was attending his own execution rather than his wedding. And perhaps he believed he was. For the bride, the bride, was the subject of London's most vicious whispers. Lady Eloise Hartley, daughter of Augustus Hartley, that ambitious merchant who made his fortune in shipping and has spent the last 5 years attempting to purchase his way into the nobility. I harbour no illusions about such transactions, a title for a fortune, bloodline for gold. It is the way of our world, whether we admit it in daylight or only whisper it after the 3rd glass of champagne. But Lady Eloise's situation was unique. You see, I have heard the rumours, we all have, whispered behind fans at Almack's, murmured over tea in drawing rooms from Mayfair to Cheapside. Poor Lady Eloise, they said. Such an unfortunate face. A tragedy, really, considering her father's wealth. Some claimed she was scarred from a childhood accident involving fire. Others swore she bore a disfigurement from birth, a twisted visage that her father kept hidden from society like a shameful secret locked in the attic. The cruelest tongues, and London possesses many, suggested she resembled a creature from a cautionary tale, the kind mothers use to frighten their daughters into obedience. I had never seen the girl myself. The Hartleys kept her sequestered, bringing her to no balls, no soirees, no public gatherings where a woman of marriageable age might typically be displayed like merchandise at market, which of course only fueled the speculation. When news of the betrothal reached my ears 3 months ago, I confess I felt a stirring of pity. For the Duke, naturally. The man had been backed into a corner by his father's staggering gambling debts, the kind of financial ruin that turns ancient estates into cautionary tales. The Ashford fortune, once legendary, had been bled dry by cards and poor investments. Alexander needed money desperately, and Augustus Hartley needed a title. A perfect marriage if one ignored the small matter of affection, or attraction, or any human feeling whatsoever. The church filled with London's elite, though I noted how many came with barely concealed glee. Nothing entertains the ton quite like watching pride brought low. The Duke, forced to wed a merchant's daughter. The Duke, shackled to an ugly bride for the sake of his crumbling legacy. The delicious irony was not lost on anyone. I positioned myself with an excellent view. A lady must have her sources after all, and watched as the ceremony began. The Duke stood rigid, his shoulders squared as though preparing for battle. His best man, Lord Pemberton, shot him sympathetic glances that the Duke ignored with admirable stoicism. The assembled guests shifted in their pews, necks craning, waiting for the bride's entrance with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for public executions or particularly scandalous trials. The organ swelled, the doors opened, and Lady Eloise Hartley began her walk down the aisle. I have seen elaborate veils before, my dear. Our brides do love their lace and silk, their demonstrations of modesty and virtue, but I have never witnessed a veil quite so excessive. Layer upon layer of the finest Brussels lace, so thick and intricate that one could not glimpse even a shadow of the face beneath. She was a ghost in white, a spectre gliding toward the altar on her father's arm. Mr. Hartley, I noted, wore an expression of grim satisfaction. He had done it. Purchased a duke for his daughter. Never mind that the groom looked like a man walking toward the gallows. The ceremony proceeded with mechanical precision. The vicar's voice echoed through the vaulted ceiling, speaking of love and devotion and other pleasant lies we tell ourselves. The Duke's responses came crisp and cold. The bride's voice, when she spoke her vows, surprised me, clear, steady, musical even. Not the voice of a cowering creature, curious. And then came the moment when every soul in that church held its breath. You may now lift the veil and kiss your bride. I watched the Duke's hands rise. They trembled, just slightly, but I am trained to notice such things. He grasped the delicate lace, hesitated for one heartbeat, and lifted. The veil fell back, and Alexander Ashford froze. I have witnessed many reactions in my career of observation, but the expression that crossed the Duke's face in that instant defied simple description. Shock, certainly. Confusion, absolutely. But there was something else, something that made my quill hand itch with anticipation. Because Lady Eloise Hartley was not ugly, not even close. She was breathtaking, raven hair arranged in elegant curls, porcelain skin that would make a painter weep, features so perfectly arranged they seemed almost unreal, cheekbones that could cut glass, lips the colour of crushed roses, and eyes, oh, those eyes, emerald green and blazing with an intelligence and defiance that struck the Duke more powerfully than any physical blow. But it was not her beauty that made the Duke stagger back half a step, though beauty she certainly possessed. It was the challenge in those eyes, the fire, the absolute refusal to play the part of grateful, rescued maiden. She met his stare with one of her own, unflinching, unyielding. A tiny smile played at the corner of her mouth, as though she found his shock amusing, as though she had expected precisely this reaction and was savouring every second of his confusion. The church erupted in whispers. The Duke stood frozen, his carefully constructed composure shattered. And I smiled, my friends, because I knew I was witnessing the beginning of something extraordinary. Tell me, dear listeners, what happens when a man gets not what he expected but precisely what he deserves? To understand what transpired at that wedding breakfast, one must first understand the chains that bound both parties to that altar. Let us begin with our Duke. Alexander Ashford was not always the cold, calculating man who stood frozen before his bride. Once he was different. I remember him at 18, fresh from Cambridge, his father still alive, the Ashford fortune still intact. He laughed then, danced the quadrille with genuine pleasure rather than obligation. There was warmth in those storm-grey eyes, a lightness that spoke of a young gentleman who believed the world held infinite possibility. Then his father died, and the truth emerged like rot beneath gilded plasterwork. The late Duke had been a gambler of the most destructive sort. Not the gentleman who wagers on horses at Newmarket, but the desperate soul who stakes family jewels on the turn of a card at White's, who signs vows whilst foxed on brandy, who borrows from cent per cents at ruinous interest because the alternative is admitting defeat to the House of Lords. Alexander inherited a dukedom, an estate in Derbyshire with leaking roofs, and debts sufficient to beggar a prince. I watched him transform over 5 years. The warmth bled away, replaced by frost. He dismissed half the servants at Ashford Manor, sold the Mayfair residence, auctioned paintings by Van Dyck and Reynolds that had graced the Long Gallery for generations. He laboured with an intensity bordering on mania, managing what remained with ruthless efficiency. But it was not sufficient. It would never be sufficient. The creditors circled. Whispers reached my ears of final demands, threats of Fleet Prison, the prospect of an ancient dukedom brought to utter ruin. Alexander had perhaps 6 months before complete collapse. He required a fortune. Immediately. Love, he told himself, was an indulgence he could ill afford. Sentiment was for romantics and fools. He would marry for £30,000, secure his inheritance, and pass his days in cold, comfortable practicality. When Augustus Hartley's solicitor arrived with a proposal, a settlement that would clear every debt and restore the Ashford estates, Alexander accepted within 24 hours. He did not request an introduction to the bride. He did not ask for a miniature portrait. The gossip about her countenance reached his ears, and he told himself it signified nothing. Beauty fades with time. Coin endures. He would perform his duty, beget an heir, and maintain separate establishments, a perfectly civilized arrangement between reasonable parties. Now, let us turn to the bride. Eloise Hartley was raised in a world that coveted her father's wealth whilst despising his origins. Trade, you comprehend, carries a particular taint amongst the peerage. No quantity of guineas can entirely wash it away. Her mother perished of childbed fever when Eloise was but 7. Her father, desperate to provide his daughter the consequence he himself could never claim, engaged the finest governesses and masters. Eloise studied Latin and Greek. She read Mr. Locke's philosophy and Mr. Wordsworth's poetry. She performed upon the pianoforte with accomplishment that would shame half the misses at Almack's. But Augustus committed a grave miscalculation. He cultivated his daughter's intellect, whilst society demanded merely beauty and docility. Eloise formed opinions. She questioned convention. She debated politics and literature. She refused to feign ignorance to soothe masculine pride. The courtship attempts that came during her first season, and there were several from younger sons seeking fortunes, evaporated once the gentleman actually conversed with her. A comely face loses appeal when attached to an impertinent tongue. Her father grew frantic. His daughter was 19, then 20, then 21, unwed. The subject of speculation and condescension. The rumours began slowly. Whether Augustus initiated them himself, I harbour suspicions though lack evidence, matters less than their effect. Poor Miss Hartley, concealed from society, such misfortune regarding her visage. Better to marry her sight unseen than endure certain rejection. When the Duke's man of business arrived, both father and daughter comprehended the transaction. She would gain a coronet. He would gain entree to the first circles. The Duke would gain solvency. And Eloise? She told herself this arrangement superior to remaining perpetually in her father's establishment, a disappointment dressed in French silk. As a duchess, she would possess her own household, her own library, her own existence. She requested nothing of the marriage save respect. The wedding breakfast was held at Hartley House, an ostentatious residence in Grosvenor Square that proclaimed new wealth from every marble column and crystal chandelier. I positioned myself with strategic advantage to observe the newly wedded couple's first moments as man and wife. They sat at table, a proper distance maintained between them. The wedding guests consumed syllabub and blancmange, stealing glances at the pair everyone had anticipated pitying. Alexander had not uttered a word since the veil was lifted. He consumed his meal with mechanical precision, his jaw clenched, his knuckles blanched around his knife. Eloise ate with flawless deportment, as though naught unusual had transpired. At length Alexander spoke. His voice was low, intended only for her hearing, but I maintain excellent sources among the footmen." "Why?" he inquired simply. Eloise regarded him, those emerald eyes glacial. "Why what, Your Grace?" "The tales, the gossip regarding your appearance, they were falsehoods." "Were they?" She took a measured sip of champagne. "Or did you merely choose to credit them because it rendered your sacrifice more endurable?" He recoiled slightly. A palpable strike. "I believed I was wedding—" He arrested himself. "A plain bride? An unfortunate creature?" Eloise finished with perfect composure. "Indeed, I am aware. London whispers, Your Grace, but it also attends. You desired a wife who would exhibit gratitude for your title, meek, invisible, a phantom to inhabit your halls whilst you expended my father's fortune restoring your precious patrimony. That is not— is it not?" She replaced her glass with exquisite care. "Permit me to speak plainly, since we are to be partners in this arrangement. You have purchased my father's wealth and the Hartley name. You have not purchased my person, my thoughts, or my will. I shall fulfill my obligations as Duchess. I shall manage your household, attend upon your entertainments, and provide you with an heir when duty requires. But I shall not pretend gratitude, I shall not simper like a schoolroom miss, and I shall not render myself invisible to preserve your pride." The Duke stared at her, his countenance displaying shock, indignation, and something else entirely, something resembling captivation. "You are not what I anticipated," he said at last. "No," Eloise concurred, her smile sharp as a blade. "I imagine I am not. But then you are precisely what I expected, Your Grace. Cold, proud, a gentleman who values his estate above all warmth or genuine feeling. Perhaps we are ideally matched after all." She turned away, engaging Lady Pemberton in animated discourse about the new exhibition at Somerset House, abandoning Alexander to sit in stunned silence. I observed his expression, and witnessed the precise moment our Duke realised his carefully orchestrated, perfectly controlled marriage had just escaped entirely beyond his command. Both believed they understood the compact they had made. Neither anticipated what it would truly cost. The wedding night. That most anticipated and whispered about moment when a bride surrenders to her husband's authority, when the transaction of marriage is finally, irrevocably completed. Alexander Ashford expected submission, perhaps nervousness, certainly gratitude. What he received was revolution. I have it on excellent authority, a lady's maid who owes me certain favours, that when the Duke entered the ducal bedchamber at Ashford Manor that evening, he found his bride already present. She stood before the fireplace in her nightdress and wrapper, her raven hair unbound, looking every inch a portrait by Mr. Lawrence. "Your Grace," she greeted him with perfect civility. Alexander had prepared a speech, something about duty and expectations and the requirements of their arrangement. The words died on his tongue. She was devastating by candlelight. "I trust the journey to Derbyshire was not too arduous," he managed finally, his voice rougher than intended. "The roads were tolerable." Eloise moved to the writing desk, where she had apparently been reviewing correspondence. "I have taken the liberty of examining the household accounts. Your steward, Mr. Graves, seems competent, though I notice certain economies that might be implemented without distressing the staff." He blinked. "You have examined the accounts?" "Naturally. I am mistress of this establishment now. It would be remiss not to understand its management." She turned to face him fully. "Which brings me to a matter we must address, Your Grace." "And what matter is that?" "The sleeping arrangements you proposed in the carriage." Her voice remained steady, though colour rose in her cheeks. "Separate chambers, separate lives, meeting only when duty requires. I thought it would be agreeable to both parties." "Did you?" Eloise crossed her arms, a gesture most unladylike that somehow suited her perfectly. "You may have purchased my father's fortune, Your Grace. You may have acquired the Hartley name and connections, but you have not purchased me, not my person, not my will, and certainly not my compliance to be tucked away in some distant wing like an embarrassing relative. Alexander felt heat rise in his chest. Anger, certainly. But beneath it, something else entirely. What precisely are you suggesting? I am suggesting we maintain the appearance of a proper marriage. We share this chamber. We present ourselves to society and staff as husband and wife, not business associates conducting a transaction. You require my father's money and my cooperation. I require respect. Respect, he repeated, the word foreign on his tongue. Indeed, I will not be invisible, Your Grace. I will not be silent. I will manage this household as befits a duchess. I will speak when I have opinions, and you will treat me as your wife and equal partner in this arrangement, or I shall make both our lives considerably more difficult than necessary. The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of this woman. No one spoke to the Duke of Ashford thus. No one issued demands. No one stood before him with chin raised and eyes blazing as though she held all the power in the room. And yet. You presume much, Alexander said coldly. I presume nothing. I state facts. Eloise moved toward him, and he caught the scent of lavender and something else, something uniquely her. We both entered this marriage with clear eyes, Your Grace. But if you believed you were acquiring a meek little mouse to hide away, then you were grievously misinformed. I am your Duchess now. I suggest you accustom yourself to it. She swept past him toward the bed, leaving Alexander standing frozen by the door of his own bedchamber, dismissed like a schoolboy. That night, they slept on opposite sides of the enormous ducal bed, a careful distance maintained between them. Alexander lay awake until dawn, intensely aware of every breath she took, every rustle of linen, every small movement. He had thought her beautiful at the altar, defiant at the breakfast, but here, in the intimate darkness, she was something far more dangerous. She was real. The following days at Ashford Manor proved equally vexing. Eloise rose early, toured the estate, consulted with the housekeeper and steward, and began implementing changes with frightening efficiency. She dismissed the elderly cook who had been robbing the household blind for years, something Alexander had suspected but never addressed. She reorganized the servants' quarters. She ordered repairs to the tenant cottages that Alexander had deemed too expensive. And she did it all without once requesting his permission. When he confronted her in the library, his sanctuary, she barely glanced up from her book. The tenants are our responsibility, Your Grace. Happy tenants work harder. It is simple economics. Economics, he repeated flatly. And where did you study economics, madam? My father's library. He may have been in trade, but he understood profit and loss better than most peers who inherited their ignorance along with their titles. The barb struck home. Alexander felt his jaw clench. You overstep. I perform my duties. She marked her page and closed the book. Is that not what you wished? A wife who would manage your household while you focused on restoring the Ashford fortunes? I wished for a wife who would obey. Then you should have married a different woman. Their eyes met, held. Thunder rumbled outside. Rain began to patter against the windows. You are impossible, Alexander said quietly. I am impossible. Eloise rose from her chair, and for the first time he noted how the firelight caught in her hair, turned her eyes to liquid emerald. You who expected to marry a woman sight unseen and tuck her away like furniture, you who sold yourself for £30,000 but somehow maintain your pride whilst judging mine. Tell me, Your Grace, which of us is truly impossible? She moved toward the door, and without thinking, Alexander caught her wrist. They both froze. Her pulse hammered beneath his fingers. Her lips parted slightly. For one suspended moment, the air between them crackled with something neither had anticipated. You challenge me at every turn, he said, his voice low. Yes, she breathed. I do. Why? Because you need to be challenged, because you have built walls around yourself so high you have forgotten what it means to feel anything at all, because I refuse to spend the rest of my life married to a statue. Alexander released her wrist as though burned. Eloise fled the library, leaving him staring after her, his heart pounding in a most alarming manner. The true test came a fortnight later. Alexander hosted a dinner party for neighbouring gentry, Lord and Lady Whitmore, Sir Henry Thornton, the Reverend Collins. An obligation, nothing more. He expected Eloise to sit quietly, perhaps contribute pleasantries about the weather. Instead, she demolished Sir Henry's opinions on the corn laws with such elegant precision that the gentleman stuttered into his soup. "But surely, Your Grace," Sir Henry protested, addressing Alexander as though Eloise had not spoken, "you agree that protecting English agriculture—" "I agree with my wife," Alexander heard himself say. The word surprised him as much as anyone. The Duchess makes a valid point about market forces. Eloise's eyes met his across the table. Something shifted in her expression. Surprise. And beneath it, the faintest hint of approval. Later, after the guests departed, Alexander found himself watching her instruct the footman on clearing the dining room. She moved with grace and authority, every inch a duchess despite her common blood. When had he begun noticing the curve of her neck, the music in her laugh, the way she worried her lower lip when deep in thought? This was not the marriage he had planned, not the cold, convenient arrangement he had designed. This was something else entirely. And terrifyingly, Alexander was beginning to realize he wanted it. 3 weeks passed at Ashford Manor, and I confess I have never been more entertained by a marriage that was, by all accounts, not meant to entertain anyone at all. My sources, and I maintain several within that household, reported a most peculiar phenomenon. The Duke and Duchess had begun a dance, not the sort performed in ballrooms, but something far more intriguing, a dance of words, of glances, of moments that shimmered with possibility before dissolving into proper distance once more. The first incident occurred on a Tuesday evening. Alexander had retreated to his library after dinner, seeking solace in silence and brandy. He found neither. Eloise sat curled in his favourite leather chair, a book open in her lap, her stockinged feet tucked beneath her in a manner most improper and utterly captivating. "That is my chair," he said from the doorway. She glanced up, unrepentant. "Then you should have claimed it before I did, Your Grace. And that is my book." "Indeed. I found it on the shelf. I assumed books in a library were meant to be read, not merely displayed like taxidermy." Alexander moved closer, close enough to see the title. "Philosophical Enquiry into the Origin of Our Ideas of the Sublime and Beautiful. Mr. Burke's Treatise. Your favourite, I believe. You have made notations throughout, rather insightful ones, I must admit." He had not expected her to find that volume. Had not anticipated anyone reading his private thoughts scribbled in margins during his Cambridge days. You should not read a gentleman's personal annotations without permission. Then you should not leave such fascinating commentary where curious wives might discover it. She smiled, and something in his chest tightened inexplicably. "You disagree with Mr. Burke regarding the nature of beauty. You argue that beauty without virtue is meaningless. I was young, idealistic. And now you are old and cynical? I am realistic. How disappointing." Eloise marked her page and rose from the chair. As she passed him, she paused. "For what it is worth, Your Grace, I prefer the young man who believed in virtue over beauty. That Alexander sounds far more interesting than the one who married me for £30,000. She left him standing in his library, her words echoing long after her footsteps faded. The second incident came during a ride across the estate. The sky had threatened rain all morning, but Alexander insisted they inspect the northern tenant farms. Eloise, to his surprise, proved an excellent horsewoman. They were 3 miles from the manor when the heavens opened. Rain poured in sheets, soaking them within moments. Alexander spotted an abandoned gamekeeper's cottage and urged his mount towards shelter, Eloise following close behind. Inside, they dripped onto the dusty floor, breathing heavily. Thunder crashed overhead. "Your habit is ruined," Alexander observed. "It will dry." Eloise wrung water from her hair, and he found himself mesmerized by the way droplets caught on her lashes. "Though I confess I failed to anticipate such weather. I should have heeded the signs." "Yes, you should have." But her tone held no censure. She moved to the small hearth, examining it. "There is wood here, dry miraculously. Do you know how to start a fire, Your Grace, or is that beneath a duke?" He should have been offended. Instead, he found himself smiling, actually smiling, as he knelt beside her. "I spent summers here as a boy. My father believed young men should know how to survive without servants. Then your father possessed more sense than mine gave him credit for." Their eyes met. Rain drummed on the roof. The cottage felt very small suddenly, very intimate. "You are shivering," Alexander said quietly. "As are you." He shrugged out of his greatcoat despite its wetness and draped it over her shoulders. His hands lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," Eloise whispered. They waited out the storm in that cottage, sitting close to the small fire Alexander coaxed to life, talking of nothing and everything. She told him of her childhood, her loneliness, her dreams of seeing Italy someday. He found himself sharing memories of his mother, dead these 10 years, whom he rarely mentioned to anyone. When the rain ceased, they rode back in companionable silence. Something had shifted. Something neither could name, but both felt keenly. The third incident occurred in the presence of society, which made it all the more significant. Lady Whitmore and her poisonous sister, Mrs. Blackwood, paid a call. I received every delicious detail from the parlour-maid who served tea. "Such a unique situation," Mrs. Blackwood remarked, her tone dripping false sympathy. "A duke marrying a merchant's daughter. One wonders what society is coming to." Eloise's teacup paused halfway to her lips, but her expression remained serene. "Of course," Lady Whitmore added, "we understand these are difficult times. Sacrifices must be made. Even dukes must occasionally—" She trailed off meaningfully. "Lower themselves," Eloise supplied coolly. "Well, I would not phrase it thus. No, you would merely imply it. How considerate." Eloise set down her cup with exquisite precision. "Tell me, Lady Whitmore, did you marry for love? Or did your father arrange your match to Sir William for his lands in Yorkshire?" Lady Whitmore coloured. "That is hardly relevant. On the contrary, it seems we all make practical decisions, madam. The only difference is that some of us possess the honesty to acknowledge it." Alexander entered at that moment, having concluded business with his steward. He assessed the tension immediately. "Mrs. Blackwood, Lady Whitmore," he greeted coldly. "How kind of you to call, though I must wonder at comments regarding my wife that I could hear from the corridor." Mrs. Blackwood paled. "Your Grace, You merely insulted the Duchess of Ashford in her own home." His voice could have frozen the Thames. "I suggest you remember that my wife is not merely a merchant's daughter. She is my Duchess, and any slight to her is a slight to me and my house. I trust I make myself clear." The ladies departed within minutes, their departure hasty and humiliated. Eloise stood by the window, her back to him. "You did not need to defend me." "Yes," Alexander said quietly. "I did." She turned, and the look in her eyes made his breath catch. The fourth incident was perhaps the most dangerous. Alexander was reviewing ledgers in his study when he sliced his palm on the sharp edge of a letter opener. He cursed, blood welling. Eloise appeared in the doorway. How did she always appear precisely when needed? And immediately took command. She fetched clean linen, water, salve. Her hands, as she cleaned and bound his wound, were gentle as prayer. "You should be more careful," she murmured, her head bent over his hand. "I was distracted." "By what?" "You." The word hung between them. Her hands stilled. She looked up, and they were so close, her lips mere inches from his. "Alexander," she whispered, his Christian name, spoken for the first time. He leaned forward. She did not retreat. The door burst open. The steward, frantic about a problem in the stables. The moment shattered. But the wanting remained. London watched the Duke and Duchess with ravenous curiosity. Whispers multiplied like rabbits. Some claimed the marriage remained unconsummated. Others suggested the Duke already regretted his choice. A few, the more observant among society, noted something else entirely brewing. I watched too, and I wondered, would you choose listeners? Pride or passion? There are moments in every tale when fate reveals its hand, when secrets long buried claw their way to the surface, demanding acknowledgement, when two souls dancing carefully around truth finally collide. This was such a moment. It began with an invitation. Lord Pemberton, Alexander's closest friend since Cambridge, arrived at Ashford Manor for a week's visit. He brought with him news from London, gossip from the clubs, and, though neither Duke nor Duchess anticipated it, the catalyst for their reckoning. The first evening passed pleasantly enough. Dinner conversation flowed easily, Pemberton proving himself an amiable guest who treated Eloise with genuine respect. I learned later that this kindness itself proved dangerous, for it lowered her guard. After the ladies withdrew, tradition dictated the gentlemen remain for port and cigars. Eloise retired to the music room, where she often spent evenings at the pianoforte. The instrument had arrived only recently, Alexander's gift, though he pretended it was merely practical furnishing for the house. She played Beethoven. The sonata's notes drifted through the manor like whispered confessions. In the dining room, Pemberton poured generous measures of port. "You seem different, Ashford. Less glacial than when I saw you in London." Alexander swirled his glass, watching the candlelight refract through ruby liquid. "Do I?" "Your wife, she is not what I expected." "No," Alexander said quietly, "she is not. The rumours were clearly exaggerated. She is extraordinarily beautiful, sharp-witted too. You are fortunate." "I thought her ugly." The words escaped before Alexander could recall them. Port loosened tongues, even ducal ones. Before the wedding, the gossip claimed she was disfigured, unfortunate. I believed it. Pemberton's eyebrows rose. "And were you disappointed or relieved when you lifted the veil?" Alexander stared into his glass. "Both. Neither. I had prepared myself for a marriage of convenience, a wife I would not desire, therefore would not be tempted by, a simple transaction. But instead I got Eloise." He spoke her Christian name like a prayer or curse. "Beautiful, brilliant, defiant Eloise, who challenges me at every turn, who makes me feel things I swore never to feel again, who has turned my carefully ordered existence into chaos." "Sounds dreadful," Pemberton said dryly. "It is dreadful. I meant to marry someone I could ignore, someone who would fade into the wallpaper while I restored the estate. At least an ugly wife would not tempt me to break my vow of indifference. At least then I could maintain control. And now? Now I am losing my mind." Alexander drained his glass. "She haunts me, Pemberton. Her scent in the library, her laughter echoing through the halls, the way she worries her lip when reading. I cannot escape her, cannot stop wanting—" He stopped. But the damage was done, because Eloise stood in the doorway. Her face was porcelain pale save for 2 spots of colour high on her cheeks. The music had ceased. How long had she been standing there? How much had she heard? Everything. She had heard everything. "Eloise!" Alexander rose, but she had already fled. He found her in the portrait gallery, standing before the painting of his mother. Rain lashed the windows. Thunder rumbled. "You wished I was ugly," she said without turning. "That is not—" "You prepared yourself for an ugly bride. You would have preferred one. At least then you would not be inconvenienced by—" "What?" "Attraction. Desire. The terrible burden of actually feeling something for your purchased wife. You misunderstand." "Do I?" She whirled to face him, and her eyes blazed with fury and hurt. You stood at that altar expecting a monster, relieved at the prospect even, because God forbid you actually want the woman you married. God forbid you lose control of your precious emotions for even a moment. I did not mean... You meant every word. Her voice cracked. You have been fighting this since the wedding. Fighting me. Fighting what we might become. All because you are terrified of wanting something you cannot command. And what of you? Alexander advanced on her, his own anger finally breaking free. What of your deceptions? Those rumors about your appearance? Where did they originate, Eloise? Did your father start them? Or did you? She flinched, a direct hit. I thought so. His laugh was bitter. You manipulated me, allowed me to believe lies so I would accept the marriage contract without investigation. You played me for a fool from the beginning. I protected myself, Eloise's voice rose. Do you know why those rumours began? Because Lord Rothmore would not cease his pursuit, because he cornered me at a ball, put his hands on me, whispered vile things about what he would do when he made me his wife, because my father could not refuse a barren suit without cause, so I gave him cause. I made myself unmarriageable. I chose reputation over safety because I had no other choice. Silence crashed between them, broken only by rain and thunder. Alexander stared at her. Rothmore? Yes. The respectable Baron Rothmore, beloved of society, the same man who has ruined 2 chambermaids and driven his first wife to laudanum. But no one speaks of that, do they? Because reputation is everything, and mine could be sacrificed to preserve his. She swiped at tears with angry fingers. So yes, I spread rumours. I made myself undesirable. And when your solicitor came with an offer, I saw escape. Not love, not even affection. Just escape from a man who terrified me. Alexander's anger evaporated, replaced by something darker, something that made his hands curl into fists. Did he hurt you? Not as much as he wished to. My father finally believed me, finally sent him away. But by then the damage was done. I was ruined goods. No respectable offers came, only yours. Eloise, do not. She held up a hand. You wanted the truth? There it is. I am not the innocent bride you imagined. I am a woman who destroyed her own reputation to escape a predator. A woman who accepted your proposal knowing you believed me ugly because at least you would not expect, would not demand. She could not finish. Alexander moved without thinking, closing the distance between them. His hands cupped her face, tilting it up. He will never touch you again. I swear it on my life. Why do you care? She whispered. You wanted indifference. You got exactly what you expected, a convenient arrangement. I was wrong. The words torn from somewhere deep. About everything. About you. About what I wanted. About what I needed. Alexander. He kissed her. Not gently, not carefully, but with all the pent longing and frustration and fear of the past weeks. She gasped against his mouth, and then she was kissing him back, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body pressing against his as though she could meld them into one person. Rain drummed, thunder crashed, and for one perfect, suspended moment, they were not duke and purchased bride, not transaction and convenience, but simply 2 souls finally, desperately connecting. His hands slid to her waist, hers to his shoulders. The kiss deepened, became something molten and necessary. Years of loneliness, of guarding themselves, dissolved in the heat between them. Then Eloise pulled back, breathing hard. Her lips were swollen, her eyes bright with unshed tears. This changes nothing, she said, though her voice shook. You still wished I was ugly, still resent wanting me. And I still accepted your proposal under false pretenses. We are built on lies, Alexander. Pretty words and stolen kisses cannot change that foundation. Eloise, I am tired. She stepped back, putting careful distance between them. I am tired of fighting you, fighting this, fighting myself. Perhaps we should simply accept what we are. A business arrangement. Nothing more. She walked away, leaving him standing beneath his mother's portrait, his lips still burning from her kiss, his heart fracturing in ways he had not known possible. And thus, I witnessed secrets kept become debts paid in heartbreak. Well now, what a turn of events. If your heart is already racing faster than a carriage at dawn, perhaps it is time to make it official. Tap that subscribe button and join our growing assembly of romantics and rogues. There are tragedies that unfold in a single catastrophic moment: a carriage accident, a duel at dawn, a fever that steals life in the night. And then there are tragedies that unfold slowly, like frost creeping across a window pane, beautiful and deadly and utterly inevitable. The Duke and Duchess of Ashford were engaged in the latter sort. The morning after their kiss, after their confessions, after everything shattered so spectacularly in the portrait gallery, Eloise moved her belongings to the East Wing. Not all of them, just enough to make the statement clear. Her dressing gowns, her books, the small watercolour of her mother she kept on her bedside table. When Alexander returned from riding, he had fled to the stables at dawn, unable to bear the sight of their empty bed. He found the ducal chamber stripped of her presence. Only the faint scent of lavender remained, mocking him. He did not go after her. Pride, that most useless of virtues, kept his feet rooted. She did not return. Pride, equally useless, kept her door locked. The household noticed immediately. Servants always notice. Maids whispered. Footmen exchanged knowing glances. Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper, maintained stony disapproval of this irregularity, but could do nothing. One does not lecture a duchess, even one who has abandoned her husband's bed after a mere 6 weeks of marriage. News travelled from Derbyshire to London with remarkable speed. By week's end, every drawing-room in Mayfair buzzed with speculation. The marriage had failed. The Duke regretted his choice. The merchant's daughter had proven unsuitable after all. How delicious, how perfectly, exquisitely satisfying for those who had watched Alexander Ashford's fall with barely concealed glee. I confess I wrote about it. How could I not? My column the following Monday morning made several pointed observations about pride and its consequences, about marriages built on necessity rather than affection, about the folly of believing one could purchase happiness. But I took no pleasure in the writing. The ton adores a tragedy so long as it happens to someone else. But even I grew weary of watching two hearts break in such exquisitely slow motion. Alexander threw himself into estate business with manic intensity. He rose before dawn, rode the boundaries, met with tenants, reviewed accounts until his eyes burned and his hand cramped from writing. Anything to avoid thinking, anything to stop remembering the taste of her lips, the feel of her body against his, the way she had kissed him back as though she too had been drowning, and he was air. At night, he sat in his library with brandy and ledgers, pretending he did not listen for her footsteps in the corridor, pretending he did not notice when she played the pianoforte in the music room, the melancholy notes drifting through the manor like ghosts. He wanted to go to her. Every night, his hand reached for the door handle. Every night, pride and fear held him back. What could he say? That he was sorry for wanting her? That he regretted his honest confession to Pemberton? That he wished he had been a better man from the start? Words seemed inadequate for the ruin between them. Eloise maintained perfect composure during daylight hours. She managed the household with ruthless efficiency. She received callers, fewer each week, as society's curiosity turned to pity, turned to disdain. She walked the gardens alone, her back straight, her chin high, every inch a duchess despite the whispers that followed her like shadows. But at night, in the privacy of her borrowed chamber, she wept. Silent tears that left her pillow damp and her eyes red come morning. She touched her wedding ring constantly, turning it round and round her finger as though it might unlock some answer to their impossible situation. She had known he would not love her, had accepted a loveless marriage as preferable to Lord Rothmore's attentions, but she had not anticipated wanting him, had not prepared for the way his rare smiles made her heart stutter, the way his intelligence challenged her own, the way his touch set her aflame. And she certainly had not anticipated that one perfect kiss that showed her everything they might have been, If only they had been different people in different circumstances. She began planning her departure in the 3rd week of their separation. Not divorce, impossible for people of their station, but a permanent separation. She would remove to her father's house in London, or perhaps Bath, where ruined marriages went to quietly expire. Alexander could visit once yearly to attempt begetting an heir. They would maintain appearances for society while living entirely separate lives. It was practical, civilized, exactly what they had originally agreed upon. So why did the thought make her want to scream? She packed slowly, secretly, a few gowns at a time, some books, letters from her father. She told no one, not even her lady's maid, who had served her since girlhood. On a particularly grey Thursday, exactly 1 month after their kiss, Eloise stood at her chamber window watching rain fall in sheets across the Derbyshire hills. Alexander rode his stallion through the downpour, a dark figure against darker sky, and she pressed her hand to the cold glass as though she could reach him. He looked up. For one moment their eyes met across the distance. Then he turned his horse and rode away, and she watched until he disappeared into the mist. That evening brought the catalyst neither anticipated. A rider arrived from London, mud-splattered and exhausted. He carried a letter for the Duke marked urgent. I learned its contents from the butler, who learned them from Alexander's man of affairs, who had been present when the Duke read the missive and went white as death. Lord Rothmore was coming to Ashford Manor. The Baron, it seemed, had heard rumours of the Duke's failed marriage, heard that the beautiful Duchess was miserable, abandoned, ripe for consolation from an old admirer. He wrote to announce his impending visit, all false concern and poisonous sympathy. I feel compelled to ensure dear Lady Eloise, forgive me, Her Grace, is well situated in her new life. Perhaps I might offer comfort in her obvious distress. The threat was clear. Rothmore knew Eloise was vulnerable, isolated, and he was coming to claim what he believed should have been his from the start. Alexander read the letter 3 times. Then he walked directly to the east wing and pounded on Eloise's door. She opened it, surprised. They had not spoken in weeks beyond cold civilities at meals. "Pack your belongings," Alexander said, his voice rough. "We are going to London, tonight." "I beg your pardon?" He handed her the letter, watched her face drain of colour as she read. "He cannot come here," she whispered. "He cannot." "He will not." Alexander's jaw clenched. "I will not allow that man within 10 miles of you. We leave within the hour. I am taking you to my grandmother's residence in Grosvenor Square. You will be safe there while I deal with Rothmore." "You do not need to." "I do." His eyes burned with something between fury and desperation. "Whatever else we are, whatever mistakes I have made, you are my wife, and I protect what is mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have angered her. Instead, it made something warm unfurl in her chest. "Alexander, we can discuss our future later, or never. I do not care. But you will not face that monster alone. Not while I draw breath." He turned to leave, then stopped. Without looking back, he said quietly, "I failed you once. I will not do so again." The door closed behind him. Eloise stood frozen, the letter trembling in her hands, her heart pounding a rhythm that felt dangerously like hope. London in November is a melancholy creature. Fog rolls through the streets like regret made visible. Rain falls in cold sheets that soak through even the finest wool. The season has ended, society has retreated to country estates, and the city feels abandoned, hollow, waiting. The Duke and Duchess of Ashford arrived at the Dowager Duchess's residence in Grosvenor Square near midnight. They had ridden in silence for 6 hours, the carriage interior thick with unspoken words and the ghost of that letter from Rothmore. Alexander saw Eloise settled in the guest chambers, then retreated to his grandmother's library. He did not sleep. Could not. His mind churned with violence and fear, and something else he dared not name. At dawn, he penned a letter to Lord Rothmore. It was brief, cold, and promised consequences should the Baron persist in his attentions toward the Duchess. He sent it by express rider, then sat staring at the dying fire, wondering when his life had spiraled so completely beyond his control. The answer, of course, was simple. The moment he lifted that veil. His grandmother arrived mid-morning. The Dowager Duchess of Ashford was 73, sharp as a blade, and possessed no patience whatsoever for masculine foolishness. She swept into the library where Alexander had spent the night, took one look at her grandson's haggard face, and rang for strong tea. "You look dreadful," she announced, settling into the chair opposite, like something the cat dragged through Cheapside. "Where is your wife?" "Asleep, I hope." "And why are you not with her?" Alexander's laugh was bitter. "She does not want me with her." "Nonsense. No woman abandons her husband's bed after 1 month unless he has given her excellent reason. What did you do?" "I married her under false pretenses, resented her beauty, wished she had been ugly so I would not be tempted to—" He stopped, scrubbing his hands over his face. "I have made a complete hash of everything, grandmother." The dowager sipped her tea with maddening calm. "Tell me about her." "What?" "Your wife. Tell me about Eloise, not her father's fortune or the marriage contract or any of that tedious business. Tell me about her." Alexander stared into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost reverent. "She is brilliant. Reads philosophy and poetry, argues politics with more insight than half the lords. She reorganized my household accounts and found savings I had missed for years." "She sounds terrifying." "She is." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "She terrifies me. She refuses to be invisible, refuses to play the meek wife. She challenges everything I say, questions every assumption. She makes me think. Makes me feel things I swore never to feel again after father died. And I have been fighting it since our wedding day. Fighting her. Fighting this—" He gestured helplessly. "I wanted a marriage I could control. A wife who would not disturb my carefully ordered existence. Instead, I got Eloise, who disturbs everything simply by breathing." The dowager set down her cup. "You love her." The denial died on his tongue. "Yes. God help me, yes. I love her wit and her fire and the way she plays Beethoven at midnight when she thinks no one listens. I love how she worries her lip when reading, how she stands up to me when I am being insufferable, how she defended my tenants and dismissed my thieving cook and made Ashford Manor feel like a home again instead of a mausoleum." His voice cracked. "I love her, grandmother, and I have destroyed any chance of her loving me in return." "Have you told her this?" "How can I? I have wounded her too deeply. I wished her ugly, resented wanting her, admitted as much to Pemberton where she could overhear. What woman would forgive such cruelty?" "A woman who loves you despite your considerable flaws." The dowager rose, surprisingly spry for her years, "which I suspect your duchess does, though she is too proud to admit it, rather like someone else I know. Even if she did, Alexander," his grandmother's voice turned sharp, "I watched your father gamble away everything your ancestors built. I watched you harden yourself into ice to survive the aftermath. But ice melts, my dear boy, and sometimes melting is not weakness. Sometimes it is the only way to truly live." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Your grandfather was not the easiest man. Proud, stubborn, convinced he knew best about everything. I nearly left him twice before we learned to bend. Do you know what saved us?" Alexander shook his head. "He stopped being afraid of wanting me. Stopped pretending our marriage was merely duty and convenience. He looked me in the eye one morning and said, 'I would rather be a fool who loves you than a wise man who does not.' It was the bravest thing he ever did." She swept from the room, leaving Alexander alone with the weight of her words. He sat motionless as morning light strengthened beyond the windows. Servants moved through the house. The city woke around him. And slowly, inexorably, something in his chest began to crack, All his careful plans, his controlled existence, his determination never to need anyone or anything beyond the Ashford legacy. What had it brought him? An empty bed, a wife in exile, a marriage built on ashes. He had been so convinced that needing Eloise meant weakness, that wanting her meant losing himself. But the truth was far simpler and infinitely more terrifying. He had already lost himself. The moment he pushed her away, he had lost the one thing that made him feel human again. Alexander rose and walked to the window. Rain fell softly on Grosvenor Square. Somewhere in this house, Eloise slept, or perhaps she lay awake as he had, wondering how they had arrived at this impossible impasse. He could let her go, accept the separation she clearly desired. They would live apart, meet occasionally for duty's sake, and slowly calcify into the sort of marriage his parents had endured. Or he could fight. The choice crystallized with perfect clarity. He would fight. For her. For them. For the possibility of something real emerging from the ruins of their beginning. Reputation be damned. Pride be damned. Control be damned. He loved Eloise Hartley Ashford, and he would spend the rest of his life proving himself worthy of her, even if she never forgave him. Even if she chose to leave. At least he would have tried. At least he would have been brave enough to kneel. Alexander found Pemberton at his club that afternoon. His friend took one look at his face and ordered brandy. "I need your help," Alexander said without preamble. "Anything." How does one apologize for being a complete and utter fool? Pemberton smiled, elaborately, publicly if necessary, and with complete sincerity. "She may refuse me." "She may, but at least you will have tried. At least you will know you fought for something that mattered." Alexander drained his brandy. "I need to confront Rothmore first. He cannot be allowed to threaten her." "I will come with you." "No. This is my responsibility. My fight." He stood, suddenly certain. "But afterward I need to speak with my wife, and I suspect I will require considerable courage." "You love her. Desperately. Then tell her that. Everything else is just noise." Meanwhile, in the guest chambers of the Dowager's residence, Eloise sat at the writing desk composing a letter to her father. She had decided. Tonight, when Alexander was occupied with whatever business had taken him from the house, she would leave, return to her father in Chelsea. The marriage was unsalvageable. Better to end it now than prolong their mutual misery. Her hand trembled as she wrote. Tears blurred the words. Because the terrible, unbearable truth was that she loved him, loved his brilliant mind and rare smiles, loved the way he had defended her to Lady Whitmore, loved how he had ridden through rain to protect her from Rothmore, loved him despite his coldness, his pride, his initial cruelty. But love was not enough. He would never see her as an equal, would always resent the desire she inspired, would forever wish their marriage had been the cold transaction he originally designed. She sealed the letter and prepared to leave. Across London, two proud souls moved toward confrontation, neither knowing the other had finally, devastatingly, surrendered to love. The confrontation with Lord Rothmore was brief and brutal. Alexander found him at Brooks's, holding court among a group of younger gentlemen who hung on his every word like disciples. The Baron was handsome in a practised way, all golden hair and calculated charm, the sort of man who knows precisely how attractive he is and wields it like a weapon. When he saw Alexander approach, his smile sharpened. "Ashford, how unexpected. I thought you were rusticated in Derbyshire with your little merchant bride." Alexander did not break stride. His fist connected with Rothmore's jaw with a crack that silenced the entire room. The Baron sprawled backwards, blood streaming from his split lip. Shock replaced his smug expression. "That," Alexander said quietly, his voice carrying in the sudden silence, "is for threatening my wife. If you ever speak her name again, if you ever come within 50 miles of her, if you even think about her, I will destroy you. Your reputation, your estates, everything. Do you understand?" Rothmore's eyes burned with humiliation and rage. But he saw something in Alexander's face that made him nod. Just once. Alexander left without another word, his knuckles bleeding, his heart pounding. It was not enough. Violence never was. But it would keep Rothmore away long enough for Alexander to fix what truly mattered: his marriage. He returned to Grosvenor Square as evening fell. Rain had started again, cold and relentless. The Dowager's butler met him at the door with uncharacteristic agitation. "Your Grace, Her Grace. Where is she?" "In her chambers, packing. She informed the staff she is leaving within the hour." Alexander took the stairs 3 at a time. He did not knock. Simply opened her door to find Eloise standing by the window, a portmanteau open on the bed behind her, half filled with gowns and books. She turned at the sound, and her expression cycled through surprise, wariness, and something that looked dangerously like longing before settling on cool composure. "Your Grace, I did not expect you back so soon." "You are leaving." Not a question. "Yes." "Where?" "My father's house in Chelsea. Or perhaps Bath. I have not yet decided." She turned back to the window, presenting him with her rigid spine. "Do not concern yourself. I will ensure the separation is managed discreetly. Your reputation need not suffer." "My reputation?" Alexander laughed, and the sound was jagged. "Do you truly believe I care about my reputation? You have always cared." "I cared about the wrong things." He moved into the room, closing the door behind him. "I cared about control and pride and maintaining the fiction that I needed no one. I cared about building walls so high that nothing could hurt me again. And in doing so, I hurt the one person I—" He stopped, steadied himself. "The one person who matters." Eloise's hands clenched on the windowsill. "Please do not do this." "Do what? Tell you the truth?" "I thought we were finished with lies." "The truth," she said bitterly, "is that you wished I had been ugly, that you resent wanting me, that our marriage has been a mistake from the beginning." "No." He crossed to her in 3 strides, turned her to face him. She refused to meet his eyes. "The truth is that I was a coward. The truth is that I wanted you from the moment I lifted that veil, and it terrified me. The truth is that I have spent our entire marriage fighting what I felt because I was too proud, too afraid, too damaged to admit that I needed you." "Alexander, let me finish, please." His hands trembled where they gripped her shoulders. "I came to that altar expecting a burden, a transaction, a wife I could ignore and control and keep at a safe distance. Instead, God gave me a gift, and I was too blind to see it. Too stupid to recognize that the woman standing before me was everything I never knew I wanted." Tears spilled down Eloise's cheeks. "You said you wished I was ugly. I know, and I hate myself for those words more than you could possibly imagine." He cupped her face with infinite gentleness, thumbs brushing away her tears. "But do you want to know the true reason I wished it? Not because I did not want to desire you, but because I was terrified that if I wanted you, if I allowed myself to need you, you would see how broken I was inside. How empty, how unworthy of someone like you. That is not— I am the monster in this story, Eloise, not you. I am the one who judged you before we met, who believed vicious gossip, who married you for money and then resented that you made me feel human again. I am the one who has wasted these past weeks in stubborn, stupid pride when I should have been on my knees begging your forgiveness." He sank down, quite literally on his knees before her, still holding her hands. "I do not deserve your forgiveness. I do not deserve you. But I am asking anyway because the alternative is watching you walk away, and I cannot bear it. I cannot bear a life without your arguments and your laughter and the way you play Beethoven at midnight. I cannot bear waking up without you. I cannot bear being the man I was before you challenged me to be better." Eloise stared down at him, this proud duke kneeling in the rain-grey light, his voice breaking, his eyes wet. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I love you." The words came raw and desperate. "I love your brilliant mind that puts mine to shame. I love your stubborn pride that matches my own. I love how you refuse to be invisible or meek or anything less than holy yourself. I love that you see through my walls to the broken man beneath and challenge me to be whole again." He pressed his forehead to her hands. "You are not the ugly bride, Eloise, you never were. I am the blind fool who could not see what was standing right in front of him. Beauty, yes, but so much more than that. Courage, intelligence, fire, everything I never knew I was starving for." "Alexander," her voice cracked, "I do not ask you to forgive me. I ask only for the chance to spend the rest of my life proving I see you now, that I value you for your mind as much as your beauty, that I want you not despite your strength but because of it, that I need you the way lungs need air and hearts need blood." Silence stretched between them, broken only by rain against glass and the sound of their ragged breathing. Then Eloise spoke, so quietly he almost missed it. "I spread those rumours myself. You were right. I know. I did it to protect myself from Rothmore, but also—" She took a shuddering breath. "Also because I was afraid. Afraid of being wanted only for my face. Afraid that any man who married me would only see beauty, never substance. That I would spend my life trapped in my own appearance like a pretty prison." She tugged him to his feet, though he resisted, and forced him to meet her gaze. "But you, Alexander Ashford, you infuriating, impossible man. You argued with me, challenged my opinions, valued my thoughts even when they contradicted yours. You made me feel seen in a way no one ever has. Eloise, I love you." The words burst from her like confession. "I have loved you since you defended me to Lady Whitmore, since you kissed me in the portrait gallery like a drowning man finding air, since you rode through rain to protect me from Rothmore. I love you despite your coldness and pride and the terrible things you said. I love you because beneath all that armour, there is a good man trying desperately to be better. I do not deserve— neither of us deserves this." She laughed through tears. "We are both proud, stubborn fools who nearly destroyed something precious because we were too afraid to be vulnerable. But perhaps that is precisely why we belong together. Perhaps we need someone equally foolish to understand." Alexander pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. "I am sorry. For everything. For every moment I made you doubt your worth. For every word that wounded you. For being too blind to see what I had. And I am sorry for the deceptions. For allowing you to believe lies. For running away instead of fighting for us." They stood wrapped in each other as rain fell and twilight deepened. No more walls between them. No more pride or fear or careful distance. Just two souls, battered and imperfect, choosing each other despite everything. "Come home with me," Alexander whispered against her temple. "Not to Derbyshire. Home. Wherever that is, as long as you are there." "Yes." She tilted her face up and he kissed her. Soft this time. Reverent. A vow remade with love instead of obligation. And thus, London gained not a conquered duchess, but a redeemed duke. 6 months have passed since that rain-soaked evening when a duke knelt before his duchess, and 2 proud hearts finally surrendered to love. Spring has brought new life to Ashford Manor. The estate hums with laughter where once only silence reigned. The Duke and Duchess, once the talk of scandal, have become the model of partnership. They walk the fields together, debate estate ledgers as equals, and just much to the servants' astonishment, are often heard laughing. Society, ever watchful, expected failure. Instead it found fascination. At the Pemberton ball they danced 3 sets, his arm too tight about her waist, her smile too radiant to ignore. The same tongues that once whispered pity now whisper envy. Her father, the merchant who raised her, has reconciled with the Duke. Their friendship, improbable though it seems, speaks to how love has softened pride on both sides. Even the tenants, once sceptical of their merchant duchess, now greet her with respect. And just this morning I received delightful confirmation: the Duchess is with child. The Duke, reportedly beside himself with both joy and terror, follows her every step with the devotion of a man who once feared to love at all. They returned to London last night, hand in hand, and when he kissed her in full view of the ballroom, well, the scandal sheets will write themselves. But this gossip columnist will tell you the truth. Their love is no spectacle, it is redemption. He wed what he thought an obligation and found a queen. She surrendered to what she feared a cage and found freedom. They expected nothing. They gained everything. And so London whispered, not in mockery this time, but in wonder. Our tale draws to a close, but London's whispers never truly end. If you were enchanted by this story of hearts unmasked and pride undone, subscribe for the next scandalous chapter of love and redemption. Share your thoughts below. We'd love to know.